I'm there. Sorry, I know that look we all do is. I'm not the only one. I'm Ed. I'm the director of Faith in Kids. We exist to support churches and parents in raising children to trust in Jesus Christ eternally. If you've come here for the lesson in how to ice a Christmas cake, you're in entirely the wrong place. So we are all about children. How do we bring churches and parents together to raise children? I think this group is often those who lead children's work in the local church. Sometimes we get Zoom bombed by church leaders, by parents, by grandparents, and just people have been dragged along and aren't quite clear why they're here at all. Whoever you are, wherever you're from, you're very welcome. I don't think it's possible for you to be in the wrong place. I'm delighted to be joined by Mark Mennell. Mark, please do unmute yourself. I'm going to ask you a few non-painful questions. Mark, just tell us, where are you sat? And is there anyone else in your house at the moment?
I am in my study in our house in Maidenhead in Berkshire. Rachel, my wife, is in her study upstairs, and we're both in Zooming meetings. So that's the story of the world, isn't it?
It is. Mark, can you give us, please, your presumably what it feels like a standard paragraph on how you busy yourself and the bits you enjoy the most?
So my day job is not full-time, but a lot of time is with Langham Partnership. That was founded by John Stott, and there are 3 branches to it, and I work for Langham Preaching, which trains and establishes preaching movements around the world. So we're working in about 75 countries, and I cover Europe and the Caribbean. So I have a team that I lead that does that. Now, don't make any silly comments about the Caribbean. I can read you like a book. Basically, I visit the Caribbean a lot by Zoom.
Mark, look, it's a hard ministry and someone needs to be called to it.
It really does need to be me.
And I'm pleased. And the only question I have, Mark, is when the parts of the world were handed out, what was the system you used as a team to allocate them?
I think just excellence.
Okay.
And proximity. Although the Caribbean isn't very close, but the idea is we have each region led by someone within it. And the plan is that the Caribbean will be fully autonomous in time, but our work is too small. So they merge with our team until such a time. But I've got this great colleague in Guyana, in Georgetown. So he does most of the sort of face-to-face stuff. And I chat with him on Zoom regularly. And, I wangle the odd visit every now and then, because you have to, really, don't you?
Good for you. Now, I've just got so immersed in the Caribbean, I forgot. So what you're trying to help Europeans and Caribbean with is how to preach wonderfully, faithfully, setting hearts on fire with the good news of Jesus Christ.
Correct.
Great. And you said that was mostly full-time. Is there a little bit left?
So, I've got different hats, but I'm currently doing a Doctor of Ministry in apologetics and communication at Covenant Seminary in St. Louis in the States. So the way it works there is you have 2 years of classes and then you write the thesis. And I got back on Monday from our last class. So it's head down for the next year or so to write my thesis.
Now, Mark, if this is my final question, if this isn't a back to front question, but the reason we've asked you in today is that we're thinking about coming out of lockdown, and we're particularly trying to think a little about the emotions of that and how we walk people through it. So I guess I'd love to say something like, the question really is, why have we asked you? But that's not fair. I think
no, because you're the one to answer that.
No, that's right. That is right. Tell us a little about the work you've done in the past on emotions and loving churches.
So I guess one of the things is a lot of these stresses and issues that have been focused during COVID have been things that I've been wrestling with for a long time. So I've battled with mental illness for a very long time and written about that. And so I think I found myself not as a kind of depression guy, but as someone who in certain constituency circles is more prepared to talk about their feelings than many. I don't know whether that is part of it, Ed, but then you better tell me.
Look, well, yes, I mean, we're all about to talk about our emotions today.
Oh,
so I'm pleased we've got I'm pleased we've got the emotional genius with us to help us with that and make us all feel more secure in doing that.
Yeah, well, if I tell you about my hang-ups, then you'll definitely feel more secure.
Mark, thank you. You've said that you're willing just to open up the Bible with us to get our hearts established in that before we start wondering what we should do. That's what we always try and do at the big day out, is before we...
Shouldn't it be called the big day in?
We could call it many things, including the slightly disappointing half day on Zoom, but we've not got Mark, please open up the Bible and encourage us as we start our time together.
Sure. Well, thanks so much for having me. It's amazing to see you all. One or two faces I recognize and many that I don't, but thank you very much for having me. So I think one of the Psalms you're going to look at in the term, is that right, is Psalm 46. So let's have a look at that. I don't think I'll read it out. I don't think we got time for that, but let me just, is that fair, Ed?
I think it is fair. If you want to read it, no one will argue.
Okay.
If you wanted to read bits, that'd be fine too.
Okay, but I hope nobody is humming the Dam Busters tune, because that's really not appropriate. But now that it's in your head, you might find yourself humming it. But that's your problem, not mine, because I'm not humming it at all. Let me read Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. God is within her, she will not fall. God will help her at break of day. Nations are in uproar, kingdoms fall. He lifts his voice and the earth melts. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Come and see what the Lord has done, the desolations he has brought on the earth. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the shields with fire. He says, be still and know that I'm God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. You may not be aware, but verse 10 is one of Bono's favorite biblical verses. And I say that not simply because I'm a fanboy, although I am, but it's amazing how actually the theme of verse 10 appears in quite a number of U2 songs. I won't bore you at this stage, but just trust me. But in an interview, in more than one interview, he's talked about this verse, and he says that basically the problem we have with it, and this is something that Eugene Peterson has talked about in terms of his translating the Bible for the Message. He says we gentrify the Bible. Eugene Peterson talks about sacrilegious approaches to the Bible that basically gentrify it or sort of diminish and subvert it. He said, but the problem is, particularly when you have a translation like the King James, say, where it's just beautiful language and so on, is that we lift it into the realms of great literature, which it in which it belongs, but we lose the edge. And that's the thing that Peterson was trying to do in the Message. We might not particularly be attuned to it because we don't speak American slang English, perhaps, but he's trying to get the language of the street, the language of everyday life, because that's what much of the Bible was in. And basically, so Bono says of verse 10, it should be, shut up, I'm God. In other words, just stop all this chatter, stop all your talking, just shut up. He's grabbing us by the scruff of his neck. And yet so often you get this verse bunged on sort of nice pictures of lambs and flowing streams and babbling brooks and all the rest. But God says, shut up. listen to me. And in some ways, that is a constant refrain of the Bible from the beginning to the end, isn't it? Just shut up, stop all this chatter and listen to me. I am God. Not any of this other rubbish, not all those other things you worship. I am God, so shut up. And in some ways, Psalm 46 is a kind of, well, not justification. God doesn't need a justification, but a sort of a foundation to why this is both possible and necessary. Why we need to shut up all the different voices that are appealing for our attention. I don't know how you found it, but for me, the lockdown season has just been pretty grim. I'm an introvert, but I still need some human interaction beyond sitting in front of a screen. And it's almost as if the lockdown has created a kind of magnifying glass on our lives, so that everything suddenly gets increased in size, but particularly emotions. Everything gets sort of ratcheted up, doesn't it? And I think the tendencies we had in churches before, but maybe did a better job of holding them back. It's almost as if the pressure cooker lid is off. And certainly, for instance, I know that there have been some scandals and things across either side of the Atlantic in our churches, and just seeing what that's done to people has been devastating. But then seeing how people have engaged with it on social media, it's like, well, I'm pretty sure you would never have been speaking like that if we'd been able just to meet in a room. Everything seems to be ratcheted up and made more extreme. And so any hang-ups or sort of fissures, sort of tiny little fractures in our makeup that we brought into lockdown have almost been compounded. And I think lots of psychologists and people have been writing about how this is having knock-on effects for all of us, and I think that's why it's absolutely right to be thinking about the emotional side of things. Emotions are not the best barometer for reality, but they are a very important warning light for unreality or brokenness. So they're the warning light sometimes on the dashboard. And so if one finds oneself with an emotional reaction to something that seems way out of proportion to the actual catalyst, the provocation, then that's a good indicator that something's out of kilter, that we need to figure out what's going on. It's not saying that we deny the emotions. It's not saying that they are irrelevant. They're very relevant, but they don't necessarily reveal reality. They're not a barometer of reality always. But the best thing we can do, and this is why the Psalms are so important, the best thing we can do is just bring those emotions to God. You see, you can't help having feelings. And actually, in a way, your feelings are morally neutral. They just are. What you do with them and how you respond to them, and if and whether you nurture and exacerbate and allow them to fester, that's a different matter. But just having the fact of this emotion is not something that one can necessarily do about, especially when we realize that actually some of it is down to chemicals. Some of it's down to how much food you've had that day and how much sleep you've had that week. All of these things fit into the mix. And so it's foolish to sort of either get all moralistic about them or to be in denial about them. But we need to bring them to God. And I think that's what the Psalms are so good at doing. And this Psalm is a case in point. So the old niggles, I think that we might, or tiny little nervousnesses we had before lockdown, I think a lot of them have sort of blossomed, I suppose, into full-blown anxieties. I don't know about you, but one of my hang-ups now is I have a real problem answering my mobile when someone rings me without booking it. So I'm very happy to have a conversation. I love talking to people, but it's got to be in the diary. And it's ridiculous. Where did that come from? I was never like that before. If I saw someone, on the phone, I would answer it. But now, no, well, you've not booked it in. You know, that you can probably explain all my problems from that, probably with reference to my mother or something, I don't know. But anyway, all these things are a bit weird. They've had an effect on us, and we just need to be ready for that. But we need to bring them to God. So let's just think about what's going on here. And I think I saw on one of Ed's sheets or somebody's sheets how the different Psalms are sort of identifying and engaging with different emotions. And the key thing here is fear and anxiety. And, you know, let's not deny the reality. Some of these fears and anxieties are well grounded. They're founded. You know, it's not out of nowhere. It's not figments of the imagination. And so plumb center at the beginning, at the end, all the way through, permeating this whole psalm, if you like, the spine of the psalm is there articulated at the beginning. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. That's solid ground. That's the bedrock. That's the place you go when you're under attack. I don't know whether you saw the Lord of the Rings films, but this is Helm's Deep. This is where you go when you're under attack, and it's impregnable, apart from by orcs, but we ignore that for now. The main point is that it's a refuge. It's safe. And you need that when you're in trouble, verse 1. Thank goodness, this is ever present. It doesn't go away. But how does this relate to our feelings? I don't know whether you remember Screwtape Letters. Here's a remarkable bit where Lewis has Screwtape. You remember the premise, a senior devil writing to Wormwood, a junior devil. And the thing about this new patient, as they call him, new believer, who is learning to pray, and they're trying to undermine his faith. And this is an ingenious way that Screwtape goes about this. And he's talking about their patients, Christians, in other words. Keep them watching their own minds and trying to produce, let's start that again. Keep them watching their own minds and trying to produce feelings there by the action of their wills. When they meant to ask him for charity, let them instead start trying to manufacture charitable feelings and not notice that this is what they're doing. When they meant to pray for courage, let them trying to feel brave. When they say they're praying for forgiveness, let them be trying to feel forgiven. Teach them to estimate the value of each prayer by their success in producing the desired feeling, and never let them suspect how much success or failure of this kind depends on whether they are well or ill, fresh or tired at the moment. Do you see his point? He's saying, yes, feelings are real, and they may well result, you know, it may well be that an answer to prayer is that you feel you can take on the world and you're courageous, but most of the time it doesn't necessarily feel like that, but that's irrelevant. Another point elsewhere, he will say, you know, courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is doing the right thing in the presence of fear. And if you think about all the things the psalmist has to fear, look at the imagery, it's pretty terrifying. There's trouble, verse 1. The earth gives way, verse 2. I don't know whether you've been in an earthquake. I've been in a mild one in Turkey. It was very weird. You know, I was giving a lecture in Istanbul and suddenly a couple of books fell off the shelf. I didn't think the lecture was that good, but anyway. Though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake, this is tsunamis. This is earthquakes. This is volcanic eruptions. You know, this is Mount Etna and being stuck in its path. It's terrifying. So those are going to make the adrenaline run, aren't they? You know, if you're in the middle of that, the heart will be pumping like crazy, and it'll probably take hours to stop pumping. I don't know whether you've been in an accident or in a moment of real danger. It takes a long time somehow for the body just to come down and just, you know, deep breaths, all the rest. So the feelings might be all over the place. And so the psalmist says, no, God in the midst of this is still our refuge and strength. You feel terrified, but This is bedrock, this is foundational. And then in verses 4 to 6, he speaks in the future, again, which seems unreal, this heavenly city. Why are we focusing on this thing? I've got this stress now. Well, that future city is our home and it's sure. And that's where he lives. And the world might be going haywire. Just read a newspaper. I mean, verse 6 is any day's newspaper, isn't it? But actually, God is the one in control. He's sovereign. And when he speaks, everything changes. The end of verse 6, he lifts his voice, the earth melts. I mean, that's the kind of thing he does in Genesis 1. He speaks and creates by speaking. And in the midst of creation, after it's all been completed, after day 7, when he speaks, it can change again. It's a click of the fingers. And so we're reminded, here's the backbone again, God Almighty, the Lord Almighty, God of Jacob, he's with us, he's our fortress, a bedrock. That doesn't change how I feel at the moment. The mountains are still shaking. I'm still terrified in the earthquake. But the earthquake doesn't change this. And his justice will never fail. So it may well be that actually the reasons for the shaking and fear derive from our sort of fear and stress of human injustice. And certainly I taught in a Bible college for a few years in Uganda, and probably about a third of our students were refugees from surrounding African countries. And I can tell you, if you think being a refugee in this country is bad, try being an African refugee in another African country. Then you really are the pits, they're despised and hated and in the way. And I'll never forget, well, I could go on for hours, but a dear brother from Congo, we were chatting one afternoon for a long time. Everyone, the college was closed for the day. We were just sitting in the library. And basically it was, he has seen so much loss and suffered so much injustice that he knew that never in a million years would he receive human justice. And he said after, weeping, and African men don't cry in front of others, let alone, their teacher or whatever, even though he was older than me. But he was weeping. He said, Mark, if it wasn't for God's judgment, I could never be a Christian. And that's what we get in verses 8, 9, and 10, isn't it? The God of justice. And when you say the God of judgment, that sounds so negative, doesn't it? But just replace that for God of justice, and it's everything. And when you see what that God of justice does, the desolations, okay, that sounds worrying in verse 8, but 9, he makes wars cease. I mean, how much injustice has this world known as a result of war? Very, very little good comes out of war. It might prevent much worse evil, but it doesn't create good. And God makes all that end, which is a supreme act of generous justice. So now, do you see why God says, shut up? Stop listening to all these other voices. Shut up and listen to me, because they're speaking nonsense. I am the Lord your God. I'm the one exalted. I am God. And it's not just a cry of pulling rank, is it? It's not God saying, hey, I'm in charge here. Do you know who I am? It's not that. He's saying, shut up, because I'm your refuge. Where else do you go without me? So, thought for the day, shut up. Over to Ed.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Mark. That frustration was only with the mute button, not you. I have failed to find a good way of praying on Zoom with 70 others. So can I suggest you each pick some way of doing it? And let's just take a moment. a moment. If Psalm 46 is open, I don't need to give you any more direction. Just take a moment, please, brothers and sisters. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. He says, "Be still and know that I am God." Father, we pray that while our hearts rage, while our hearts find it so hard to be still, there is a place where we can know peace. And Christ offers us that peace now. We pray, Father, we would know the certainty of you as our refuge, irrespective of how we feel or what we see. As we consider our churches, as we consider our ministries, as we consider families we love dearly, we pray we would not stop knowing that you are their refuge and our refuge, and you have us and you have them. Amen. Amy is modelling for us the art of chat. Please do be putting in chat. There's even a thing that we do where we take out some of the, what did he just say, comments, and where people have sent us to a link, where people have given us advice. We're going to email that to you out afterwards with a link to the video of this session. The main sessions are recorded. I promise your breakout groups aren't, and people can watch them. You can watch them at double speed if you wish afterwards on our YouTube channel. I have a straw poll question for us before we just meet those in our breakout groups. I have 3 questions that I would love us to answer, partly just to understand our situation, each other's. It will just give us some sort of magical percentage. First one, are your services now in person, only online, or a mix of both? Okay. So just understanding how much you are still doing those COVID Zoom worlds and how much you might keep doing them for years to come. But anyway, at the moment, second question, during Sunday services, where are the children? So have you returned to what you were doing before COVID in where they are, what they do? Are they mostly in groups, but not entirely? Are they mostly in services? In other words, the children in your church are doing more all-age services than they would have done a year and a half ago, or are they entirely in services and there are no groups running? Okay, I'm sure there are at least 10 other options, but can you, for your children, which of those? And then finally, who are you personally most concerned about? This is clearly arbitrary. It's anonymous. There's even one that I've tried to gently phrase because you're allowed to say yourself that is a valid answer. You are nervous and worried about your own well-being right now, but can you just pick which of those you are most concerned about? And then you submit, and then as if by magic, we find out some arbitrary answers that don't tell us very much at all, and we think, no, well, that was worth doing. So in a moment, they'll come up. We're about to go to our breakout groups. I'll just talk for a moment while you finish clicking buttons and submitting things. We're going to go to our breakout groups. They're not recorded. I think the best thing to do in that breakout group is just introduce yourself, explain where you are. I always think there's some value in just saying, is there something that has encouraged you or something you're finding difficult? You don't have to give both, but that just allows each other to know how you're feeling, where are you at, and how gentle to be with you for the rest of the session. Anita, I guess when you are ready, you send us to your breakout groups. I assume everyone has, I don't know, if you don't submit, I don't know what happens. I can't answer anything. So, Anita, oh, there we go. I've got some answers. A mix of both for where you are in Sundays now is 87%. Mostly your children are in groups. So 44% our children are back in groups. 20% all our children are in services. And then the group you are most concerned about is your children's ministry team. This is helpful for us. Amy and I and Mark are busily scribbling now, trying to work out how that might affect what we say to you later. Thank you very much for doing that. We're now going to go to our breakout groups. Who are you, where are you, and how are you feeling? That'd be a great way to go round. I think you're in there for about 7 minutes. Anita, thank you very much. Less of a shock now. Welcome back. I bet you all had as good a time as I did. I want to say on behalf of everyone, thank you for being honest. Thank you for explaining how you're feeling. Thank you for explaining your story. I've been scribbling. It's been great. Now I'm going to hand straight on to Amy. Amy's part of the Faith in Kids team. Amy, just tell us where you're sat, how you're feeling, and talk to us about caring for parents.
Morning. I'm Amy. I'm sat at my kitchen workbench in Liverpool. We've just had a lovely chat in our breakout groups. We forgot to do the normal thing of saying who we are and where we're from, because we were all just having a lovely time, judging one another from Psalm 46. So that was great. And I think was a worked example of actually what do we need and what do parents need is we need to be reminded that God is God and that in him we are safe and he is our refuge. And just that process of working through a Bible passage together and talking about lockdown being tough and feeling emotionally raw, but remembering that God is with us, I just was just lovely. And that is actually what we need to offer to our parents too. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you briefly, and I can't, obviously it's me, I can't talk without felt tips and a prop. So I'm going to introduce you to this is, Ed's already laughing. This is kids worker Karen, and kids worker Karen has spent the last year throwing plans in the bin, writing new plans, recording talks, sending things to parents, hoping something that she is doing is helping, but basically not sure. And now she feels a little bit frazzled. So kids worker Karen is over here. I'm putting her on my professional Rice Krispies box. And over here we have Mum Maureen. Mum Maureen is has also spent the last year just trying to be okay and do lots of different things like homeschool and teach Sunday school and try and encourage her children that online church isn't only awful, and do all kinds of different things. So kids worker Karen and Mum Maureen are our two characters. Now I'm going to let you into a secret. Kids worker Karen has always been a little bit frightened of parents in her church. And I'm allowed to say that because I was kids worker Karen, and I'm okay with saying we're frightened of talking to parents. So, and the reason we have been frightened of talking to parents in the past is because we think they know more than we do. So we look at them and we think to the parents, you are spending all the time with the children, you know what you're doing. Who am I to tell you what to do? I haven't got any advice to give you. So I'm going to hide with your kids in my Sunday school class and have a lovely time, teach them the Bible, but I'm a bit scared of talking to you. Meanwhile, Mum Maureen, and I'm allowed to say that because I wear this hat now, she has always been a bit scared of kids worker Karen. because kids worker Karen seems to have lots of energy, enthusiasm, ideas, and knows the Bible really well. So she doesn't want to talk to kids worker Karen about how things are going at home because she feels like a failure. So both of these people are looking at one another saying, you're doing a better job than me and you know more than me. It's almost like there is a wall between them, cue wall. How are we going to break down the wall between the kids worker and the parent who are both scared of one another? And how are we going to say, guess what, guys, you are a team? How are we going to persuade them that valued partnership is the key? Well, why? Because both of them love Jimmy. So Jimmy, her son, in her Sunday school class, they are God's gift to him. The two of them together are God's gift to this little boy. They are God's plan A for discipling and encouraging him. The church and the family, church is family, family is church. This is God's plan for growing and discipling children, being together in a valued partnership. So I figure because we're all kids workers or parents or a bit of both, we all totally agree that that is true. The difficulty is the next stage. How do we make that happen? So in this room, we have bags of experience, and you're going to be better at the practicals of how you make this happen than me. But I want to give you 2 principles to bust a wall so that we can work on partnership. Ed's impressed at my visual. I got a shock face. So our 2 principles are communicate and connect. So communicate. How are these 2? Oh, my walls fall on the floor. How are these 2 going to communicate better? So a key thing of communication, apparently, is that it's supposed to be 2-way. So how is she going to tell Mum, this is what we're learning this term, this is what we're going to be doing? How is Mum going to tell her, this is what's going on at home, this is what we're struggling with, this is what we're thinking through, this is what they're enjoying, this is what I'm not enjoying? How are we going to help communication happen so that it's both ways? Are you sending a plan of what you're going to teach this term? Are you giving one tee up for a conversation to have at home? Are you saying how it's going? Are you saying how lockdown has gone and what they're struggling with and what they're thinking about? A really brilliant way to communicate that isn't, let's send another email, let's send another plan, let's write a newsletter. How about conversation? How can we make conversations happen? In the last year, we've learned good ways and new ways of making conversations. I've been to a virtual parents' evening at my son's school, which meant I didn't need to leave the house for parents' night. And it was a 5-minute conversation with a timer that ran, and we said how he was getting on, and I told you how I was getting on. And it was really quick and it was done dead easily. Is that something we could think of doing? Can we just send a WhatsApp message that isn't another email to everybody? How are you going? Can we ask some direct questions so that we don't play the game of pretending that everything is okay? Can you open up and say, I've found this really hard. I know that some families have found stuff really hard. How are you getting on? How are the kids doing? Communication. Sharing things to pray for. Nothing forms a relationship better than praying for one another. Things to celebrate. Things to encourage one another with. Could you have a coffee together somewhere? Could you have parents' coffee for your class at the end of your time together? Could you have a parent panel? Now that sounds like a terrifying thing to say, but as you're planning ahead, could you ask a few parents to come round to your house to sit in the garden, have a cup of tea and say, what do you think we need to do differently? Start the conversation. That's number 1, ways to communicate. Number 2, ways to make a connection. How can you help what you're teaching, what you're talking about, make a connection into the life and the faith of this family? How can you tee them up to have one good conversation over tea this week? How could you tee them up to have one good chat on a walk to school, on a day out? How can you make faith connect to life? How can you ask parents what's going on in life so that you can make what you're talking about on Sunday connect to where they're at. Another point of connection, how can you point families to a resource that's going to help them? You know them better. You know if they'd really enjoy listening to a podcast series together. You know if they'd really enjoy to do a book together, or suggest a day camp they could go on, or a thing that they could go to. You know them better. You know what's out there. There's that trendy word about curating resources for people. Could you do that? Could you curate a resource for families in your church? Can you make a connection from what is happening in your children's ministry to what is happening in your wider church? Can you pull them in? Can you tell them what's going on? Grandparent figures in your church are brilliant. They're passionate prayers. Could you tell them what's happening, what's struggling, what the team needs? Could you get people to pray? How about running an event, alarm bells event? How about making sure part of your programme features inviting parents and children to come together? We've been very good at saying I'm running a thing for the children. How about saying I'm running a mums and sons thing? Why don't you come together? You could go around different tables. You could encourage them to pray, talk about a thing. You could do a dads and daughters. You could do a whole family. You could try and encourage the family to talk about faith together, rather than the parents are over here, the kids are over here, and then they go home and they probably don't talk about it in the week. Communicate, connect, break down those barriers so we can have partnership. You've all got better ideas of how to make those things happen, and you can put them in the chat. Ed gave me the 2-finger warning.
Amy, don't publicise that fact, or people will look at it because they don't know what would have come next if you hadn't stopped talking. The way this is going to work then is Amy's brilliance has to be stored for a moment. We're going to have some Mark brilliance, and then we're going to go into our breakout group to talk about those 2 slots. Okay, so we're handing over to Mark now. While you're listening to Mark, you scribble down the best ideas, you scribble down the better ideas, you scribble down the questions. Okay, Mark, please unmute yourself. Go for your life.
Well, I think this is uncharted territory, isn't it? So we are dealing with a situation that has never quite happened before. There've been quarantines and lockdowns and things in previous generations, but it's certainly there are aspects of this that are brand new, and I would imagine it's certainly the first time in our own experience of this. I think we just need to give people a lot of slack and be slow to assume you understand why certain things have been said or done or not done. So if people have stopped coming to church, or perhaps even been less frequent in attending Zoom church, or however you've done it, just don't assume you know why. Don't assume the worst, and don't assume necessarily that it's because they're slacking or they are drifting away or whatever. There are so many different complicating factors, and I think it's a bit of an evangelical disease to presume to be able to read the heart and mind of another person. And I think when we stop and think about what's going on and analyze ourselves, and then sort of reflect on conversation with people, my experience is that 7 out of 10, maybe more, we've got the wrong end of the stick. And so that means we need to give people time to listen to them. So I would really make a priority of, certainly as things open up in terms of cafes and whatever, taking the dogs for walks or whatever, actually really invest in one-to-one time with people, particularly some of the key parents, or maybe people who are on your teams or whatever, that actually the relational side of things is what suffered most over the last couple of years. And so it's not going to just snap back into place. There's going to be a lot of things that either have lost their momentum or are just different now, quite apart from whether or not this has led to greater anxieties and all the rest. So I think go for the individuals rather than the grand scheme and the strategies. But feel free to ask me about that. And I think just don't expect too much too soon. I always remember a guy who mentored me when I was first working for a church after graduating. And I don't know where this originally came from. I know it's not him who originated it, but we always overestimate what we can do in a year and massively underestimate what we can do in 5. And it's very hard to think in terms of beyond the end of the print run of our program, however you do it, maybe a quarterly program, or maybe thinking, right, this is what I want to do in a year. But it'd be quite an interesting thing to do, wouldn't it? Just to say, right, okay, even if you've not been in a particular post or role, just see what's happened in the ministry you're involved in the last 5 years, whether you had much to do with it or not. And just imagine what it was like at the beginning of those 5 years, and just wonder, actually, could we even have dreamt that these things would have been possible? And so play the long game. Don't look for instant results. I think a lot of Western Christianity is completely hamstrung by wanting the instant results, wanting the stats, wanting the registration figures and all of that. And there's a place for it, but man, it is so low down the scale of what really matters. And it's interesting, isn't it? Jesus subverts all of that sort of number crunching by leaving the 99 to go after the 1. I mean, statistically, logically, safeguardingly, that's nonsense. But somehow there's a profound kingdom logic to that. And I think don't necessarily assume that the things that you had in the program that you had before can just be, you just press the button and they start up again. This is going to be new territory, so don't go into it too quickly. I think part of it is we're desperate to be together again, and that's right, and so we should. But actually allow the space for people to generate ideas and ways of doing things that perhaps occurred to them during the lockdown and would never have occurred to them otherwise, and nobody would have given it space or time to reflect on otherwise, and say, okay, well, maybe this is a good thing to come out of it. So be searching for those redemptive, those positive opportunities that have come out of this weirdest of times, that actually we can look back and say, thank you, Lord, you were bringing us to that point. We would have never have thought of doing X or Y if we hadn't had COVID, and use that to sort of permeate your prayers and so on. I don't know, Ed, whether you want to pick up on any of that. Do wake up, please. You were thinking.
I was writing. I was taking.
Oh, how lovely.
I think the best thing, Mark, is that we go in just one moment to breakout groups, and the obvious things in those breakout groups is to share what you feel inspired by, to share the idea you have heard where you've taken it on. So, for instance, Amy's idea of how can you connect parents with their children, with their churches. Have you got one way that it occurs to you have done or you could do? When Mark talks about what is there from this weird year that could be shown to be a work of God's grace, can you tell one another stories of those redemptive works? I think our breakout groups are places for stories, but they're also places for questions. You can come out of that breakout group with your questions for Amy, for Mark, for each other, and we'll give time to that. Okay, that's enough from me. Thank you, Mark. Stay for the end of this breakout group. Let's go now to our breakout groups. You know what to do. I'll see you on the other side in 7 minutes' time. Welcome back. This is the moment where we go crazy. You unmute yourselves and you can talk. Questions, thoughts, stories someone else in your group said that were encouraging, things you are enjoying. All of us are thinking, no, not me. So someone has to be brave enough and share what someone else said or what someone else asked. Or we can just enjoy the peace and tranquility of silence on Zoom. I don't mind. Well, there you go. Amy's saying, put your question in the chat. Off we go. We can do this.
I think for me it was what Mark said about don't expect too much too soon. I think the first session we met back, I had a full-blown kids plan already up my sleeve, and then the kids arrived and I thought there is no chance this is going to work, because the children are just not used to that format anymore. They've been homeschooled, their school's been so disjointed for them to sit and listen for, and you know, the whole plan of a game or whatever just doesn't work. So for me, I think that really resonated is play the log game, don't expect too much too soon, and keep it really simple. One point, you know, maybe one verse that you want them to learn, or one prayer activity, and then let them socialize and connect with each other. Because we as adults, if we're meeting again with our home group for the first time, we find we are all good intentions of doing our Bible study and our prayer, but actually we've spent majority of our time chatting over coffee out in the garden or whatever, because we want connection and relationship. And that's what the children want. They don't want to come back into church and just feel like they're being talked at again. So keep it really simple, and don't expect too much too soon from them. I think that was what we kind of chatted about in our group.
Rosie, absolutely fantastic. Sadly, you've set the bar unbelievably high. So now we need someone just to dribble a bit and say, I don't really know what to say now. But anyone else want to join in? Rosie, thank you so much.
I think I was quite encouraged by the vicar in our group, Ian Baker, because I just felt that he'd been so honest and quite open and vulnerable by, you know, some of his fears and some of the things that he's going through. And it just made me think, gosh, I've been thinking so much about the children and, you know, how to get them back together, and also the children's team. I just forget that our church leadership are going through things themselves. And, you know, it just made me think that we have to think about them as well. And, you know, we all need grace, like I said before, and to give people that time and not to expect too much. So that was quite, I say encouraging, because I just felt that it just helped. It's going to help me and how we think and go forward.
Wendy, thank you.
I'm glad my mess and chaos is encouraging.
Ian, everyone wants you in their group. You're now the vulnerable vicar from Kids Grove, I'm sorry.
The vulnerable vicar. I'm sticking that on the door.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you. I had a church leader tell me this week he doesn't know of another church leader who isn't, you know, some version of in bits. So I think, Wendy, I do think, you know, part of our function here as a group is how can we work with our church leadership teams, knowing that they are finding this difficult too. I can't speak for them, but thank you, Wendy. Someone else? Yeah, don't put up your hand, go.
Hi, so I found it really helpful what Amy shared, in particular about that sort of, as a single person, not a parent, the fear of talking to parents at times, not so much individually, but, you know, I'm planning, you know, a session on parenting, and the sort of almost like lack of confidence in thinking that I have something to bring to that evening, you know, rather than people thinking, oh, what does she know? So I think that I had I had a sort of emotional reaction just to her saying it, because it was acknowledging something I'd experienced last year and now, yeah. So thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Jen, and thank you, Amy. And I mean, about everything you want to say, sort of, Amy, what do we do then? But she did tell us, fortunately, communicate and connect. They both begin with C and they're stuck in a wall. Easy to remember. Thank you, Amy. Anyone else? This is going wonderfully well.
Yeah, we had quite a fun discussion about just some of the encouragements of lockdown, just making us have to be more flexible, and that was such a great thing, and how we could take that forward, particularly being flexible with the view to spending more time in communicating and in relationships. So not being so focused on our programs as to say, do you know what, we're just not going to do Sunday school this week, we're going to go on a picnic or whatever. Like, we've learned we can do things differently and we can do things flexibly, which has been a really, really good thing. So yeah. Thank
you, Nicola. That I think taps into it. Mark, can you remind me what your phrase was? Redeemed? I want to say redeemed hurt or redeemed chaos. It was a great phrase. What was it? You take the broken bits of lockdown and discover something good has come from it.
Right, yes. That's basically what it meant, but I can't remember the phrase.
It was anyway. Nicola's just given an example of that. That we come out of lockdown clearer. That relationship is what we're searching for if we're about families and children, rather than events.
And redeeming through the brokenness of it all. I think, just related to that, I think this has all reminded us that we are embodied, and that, you know, the tech giants want us all to become more and more virtualized. Their business plans depend on it, and we've had that imposed on us for the last 18 months. And I think it's reminding us that actually, no, we're not virtual, we are embodied, and that actually our embodiedness, for all its mess and smells and awkwardness and everything else, is actually fundamental to who we are. And it's part of just how we relate to other people. We don't think about it until it's gone. And I was sitting on a train the other day, first time for ages. Someone was smelling an aftershave, and it was like, it had some aftershave on. I hadn't smelled that smell before, and it was like, oh yeah, that's what normal people, real people have. It was a shock. He had too much as well, so that doubled the shock.
We can stop there, Mark. We can stop there. We are just about to go on a break, and the only thing I just thought I'd do is I'm just going to drop into the chat the last session we did at the last big day out. There you go. No, that's not just to Anita. It's good to everyone there. That is what we did in our last session when we were together. What is children's ministry? And one of the things we were looking at there is it is about people, not events. I highly recommend that slot. Nicola's nodding. I'm so pleased that we're joining dots here. Thank you. Look at Amy. Amy, do you have some sort of cabinet behind you with all previous weird felt tip visuals?
Never throw a visual away, Ed.
Never throw a visual away. Okay, now we need to move on before Amy starts giving us 10 more she's done recently. We're going to take a short break now. I'm going to suggest it's only 5 minutes. I wish we could hear from more of you. I think my main point is we need another half an hour in this session just to hear from people. 5 minutes, we're going to be back. My clock says 11:12. We're going to be back at 11:17. That only gives you time to run to the loo and make a coffee. See you then. Well done. It's great. There we go. Now, all the time, people are typing into the chat things they've done, things they're thinking. Please continue to do that. To get into the chat, you don't have to have reached a certain bar of excellence. People love to hear stories. People love to hear ideas. People love to hear a link that you have learned from, a resource you found helpful. You put it in there. So let me just sketch out what is left. I'm going to be looking a little now at gathering together. Amy has already looked at caring for parents. Mark has helped us a little bit with leading a church through this time. And then after this, we will be showing you a resource we've got and how we think we're going to be picking up on that 45% of you who are most worried about, 55% of you who are most worried about your children's ministry teams. We're going to come to them at the end, okay? I wanted to say a little about gatherings, how we do gatherings, and particularly picking up on a theme we're hearing, which is a common theme we hear is that churches more and more are switching on to how do we care for whole families rather than separating them out more than perhaps we would now choose to do. So a pattern we have seen that is much discussed is we tend to put children through one door in our church and young people through another door in our church. And one thing that lockdown has demonstrated is that they are families and they have done their spiritual lives as families, as they have done their homework as families. And we have understood Perhaps parents have understood more clearly than ever before that they are the world experts on their own children. And perhaps at the end of lockdown, parents have never known their children so well as they do now. They may not have chosen to have spent that many hours with them, but they have. So they now know every blemish, every peculiarity and eccentricity of every one of their children. But this is not new to the Lord. That was always his plan. Parents have always been not just plan A, but the only plan for their children. That has always been the way it was. And maybe as churches now, we are just wondering, how do we equip parents for what they are clearer is their role? How do we partner with them better? One way of doing that, I think, and for those of you who are still doing children in services, I think it's a pressing thing. So the stats we had earlier is that only 15% of us are back to what we were doing. So that means 85% of us aren't yet back to what we were doing, to be clear. And 21%, the children are all in services all the time. That is the only way they do church at the moment. And another 21%, so we're up to 42%, are mostly in services. So a lot of us are still doing all age services. I just wanted to say a bit about that. I had a very helpful conversation with someone who works in underdeprived areas of the UK. And they were saying the phrase they try to use is accessible church, which I found very helpful, because I think the phrase all age church, I think is a painful phrase for most people, in that parents dread them because their children are badly behaved and disengaged. Those without children dread them because apparently they're just for the children. And vicars dread them because they're a great deal of work. I think at the moment we're all trying to explore what is accessible church. What is church, which means anyone could be there and they can engage. So that includes the guests who have not been in church before, but have discovered us online. What about those families who have discovered us online and are nervous they can't bring their children into our church? What about those people who are just coming back to church and they're feeling a bit bruised? How can we make church truly accessible? People are putting in wonderful names they're using to avoid all age church as the title. How do we make church accessible? Can I just give you a few things that I would be doing to say we don't need church to be reinvented for children. In fact, if we could make it so that everyone felt that they were being engaged. Firstly, for instance, is there a moment at the beginning of church where you just turn to your neighbour and talk about the big topic we're looking at with just a simple question? One question that everyone could talk about that requires no previous Bible knowledge or experience of church. That gets us in the direction of our thinking in this service and highlights for parents and children what is the big idea we're looking at. Is it possible in our churches to consider breaking up the sermon that was written for adults into 3 sections or 2 sections? So the same sermon, but split up into chunks of 5, 7, maybe even 10 minutes, which would just allow all of our 11-year-olds at least to be able to concentrate for the whole of that slot. Would we be able to help our church leaders with an equivalent question at the end of those slots that allows everyone to talk, and that's not just based on the children, but there might, for instance, be 2 levels of question or even 3. An under 11s question, if you really got complicated, an under 5s question, a 5s to 11s, an 11s to 16s, and an adult. That would be the complicated version. The simple version is a question that gets us to ponder the so what of the sermon. It could even be that if you're thinking on your feet, this is a stitch up, but the minister turns to you at the end of the sermon after one more song and says, why don't you tell us what we could talk about now? And you have to stand up and come up with one question for everyone. That is a stitch up. I don't recommend it, but it is an emergency that could work. Could we also give our preachers, vicars, pastors help that each week there is one application for parents? So the big idea of the sermon, what would it look like for the parents to go home and talk about this with their children, whether they're in the room or not in the room? So how do we train our parents to be the pastors of their families? Is there one line of the sermon that says maybe this week is a topic to talk about? Now, the really lovely thing would be that if the children are in the service, there was just a line for each age group. So for instance, there's a line of the sermon that started with, if you're a teenager here today, if you are in primary school here today, if you are under 5 here today. Now they don't know they're under 5 if they're 3. So you're going to have to say if you're 2, 3, 4 or 5. And all that says is it just simply says, in the same way we're maybe more used to hearing, if you're not a Christian here today, that's something we're used to. If you're new to Christian things, these are all things we're used to. It's just a way of saying you're seen. This whole service is not for the teenagers, but I know you're here. I know you're here. Now, I just want to say we've already highlighted, particularly because Vulnerable Vicar Ian is with us, and he has been honest that he's having a hard time, that our church leaders are finding this difficult. I spoke to a church leader recently. I gave him these suggestions. He said, just so you know, this is a lot more than half an hour's extra work in sermon prep. So our church leaders find it difficult to know how we hit the 5s to 11s, how we hit the 11s to 16s with one application. The people in this room, we are the people who get this. We are the people who get, what would a question be for a mother to take away from church today to have a chat in the car on the way home? That isn't, what did we learn at church today? People are putting in comments all the time. And for instance, Lynn is just saying, we are bouncing around ideas. We talk about it as a team. Isn't that perfect? In other words, Vicar, this does not sit entirely on you. Leader of kids ministry, this does not entirely sit on you. Together, we have the expertise, and crucially, we know our families really well. We know our children really well. We can help one another to do this. How can we make church accessible? That should be the question we ask each other. What would it look like for church to be accessible? And around those people involved in church leadership, can we just name the groups we would love felt more accessed? That's not right. Who felt like church was more accessible for them. That's better. That's better. The goal must be, to finish, how can parents whose children are in the service feel like they are being empowered rather than embarrassed? How can parents feel like this was an opportunity we're taking rather than this is the worst option and COVID's left us with it? So children sitting there next to in church, we in this room all believe this is an opportunity. This is a good thing. The stats tell us that those coming to the end of their time in their home church, 17 and 18-year-olds, they believe they're going to keep coming to church because their experience of their home church has been good. Do you follow? When you ask a 17, 18-year-old, what do you think of church? They might say boring, but they also say, I'm loved, I'm known, I'm cared for. When you track that 18-year-old to their next church in their first job when they're at uni, they don't go because they walk in the room and discover they know no one. Because they haven't connected that church is about Christ, not about everyone knowing them. If church is about Christ, you arrive at church saying, I'm now going to make the effort. I'm now going to get to know people. If church has only been, I'm known, I'm loved, it's a community. So children being in church is an opportunity to say, church is for you. It is about Christ. We gather, you're loved. Your behavior doesn't need to be up to the mark. But parents, let me empower you to help your children see Christ rather than just know they're loved and they're part of this community. Thank you very much. In breakout groups, we'll have a chance to talk about that more. Amy, over to you to tell us a bit about how we can lead our children's ministry teams back to work.
Hello. Okay. Oh, I'm on a weird view. Sorry, now I can see. So I think, prepare yourself for another visual. Dun, 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 dun. So I think as leaders, the last few months have probably felt a little bit like a game of a bowling alley thing. So if you imagine this is you and this is your team behind you, like Skittles, and it feels like when you've started to try and say, let's come back together and do stuff, and who's around to help get kids groups off the ground, all of a sudden, oh no, where's everybody gone? And I think that is a reality that we need to have those conversations about. Are we being realistic? Who is in our kids group? Who is okay? Who wants to? Why do people feel the need to go? Are they really struggling? Has life changed during COVID? Has working patterns changed? There's lots of reasons why this skittle effect might feel like it has happened. One thing I would just encourage you with is, if you go to people and say, are you ready to, can you commit to coming back to do everything as we did it before? Here's your lesson plan, can you do next Sunday, please? It's not a great way to start a conversation about coming back to ministry. We want to remind people why we do what we do, and we want to try and work out what is sustainable. And the best way to do that is, and loads of you have done this already, try and gather your team, try and meet up one-to-one, try and have a barbecue in the garden, try and have a coffee and a chat. How are you? Where are we at? What do you think we could do? What are you passionate about? What are you frightened of? Let's have a conversation. And I think then helping that shape what you're going to do next and what you can commit to. And I think just instead of feeling this fear that we have to run everything as we always did, how can we work out together what things are going to look like? And I just think this morning it's really powerful to sit in a room of other people and look at a Bible passage together and remind one another of how God is good, and why we care and what truth we have to share. And if you gather a group of people and say, are you okay to be on a rota for the next 6 months? Generally speaking, everyone's going to panic and say no. But if you sat in a garden with the Bible open and talked about how this is good news, and remind them that how it's really encouraged you to hear that this is good news, and then because they were doing kids work and they had a heart and a passion for it anyway, they're already starting to think about how this would be good news and they'd love to do this activity, and that this is how they could teach it to the age group that they were teaching before. And before you know it, they remember why they do what they do. And if you're really clever, say you get your little team together, you might invite some of the kids round for a picnic. And before anybody commits to anything, we say, oh, look, here's these kids that we've loved and we've missed. And actually, what does it look like? It doesn't look like stress and commitment and calendars and plans and meetings. It looks like talking about Jesus with biscuits. It looks like praying for one another and having a bit of a laugh while we have a game and we read a Bible verse at the end. And suddenly, I'm not being tied in knots to something, but my heart for why I was ever involved in kids ministry in the first place is melted, and I want back in. The only other thing I would say is, don't forget that you've now got a load more people who know what it's like to talk to their kids about Jesus. So can you engage parents with saying, I would love you to come into the lesson. I would love you to come and be in a group with us. Like, forget what it was called before and forget that it was run by these people before. How about I help you and you help me, and why don't we all just sit down and chat about the Bible together? So you've potentially got a load more people in your parents who, yes, they're going to say, I just want to send them to somewhere else to hear about Jesus for a bit because I've been doing everything. But if you could say, but there's loads of you and we're all going to work together. So I guess what I'm saying is the same thing that we've said in lots of ways already. Sit down, have conversations, talk to parents, talk to leaders, use over the summer to try and meet up relationally, use over the summer to try and read the Bible together, use chances that you can now meet up to go for a coffee to have a chat. What do you think things could look like going forward? What would you love to be involved in? What are you terrified of? And trust God. It's the shape of things might change. The shape of things might be different. It might take a while. It might never look like it did before, but that's okay. Meet with your team. It's almost like I could do the thing again of putting the wall between you and your other people on your team, and I could explode it and say, why don't you communicate, connect again? And you've already done this in lots of different ways. So please say the things that I haven't said in a better way in the chat. Ed?
We had some churches come to us and say, can you help us as we come in this next stage to help our children? We have put together a series, and I am just going to put 2 files into the chat. They're both quite large files because they're brilliant. Now, Anita will be emailing you afterwards, we believe. Anita says she is, or I'm only just saying they're such big files. I'm not sure Anita knows how big they are. But this is the introduction to the series, and this is the first week of the series. So what we have understood by talking to experts is what we need to offer children, and you could argue everyone, is first of all, space for honesty. Now, the conversation we had earlier, one of you said, I'd had a whole lesson planned, and then I just realized we weren't going to do that. In other words, at the moment, we need to give more space to let people say how they're feeling and what has happened. Step 1. Step 2, we need to acknowledge brokenness and hurt. So for instance, there may be people in our churches who are angry that we haven't looked after them better. Those people might have been looked after very well, but they don't feel looked after. There might be people in our churches who are grieving or mourning. Something has been lost, and it could be the life of a loved one. Some people in our churches have discovered they preferred not being in church, and they might want to admit that. I know someone in my church with chronic anxiety. She's being honest and saying it's a relief for her not to have to cope with church every Sunday. I heard a church leader say she doesn't look forward to coming to church because of the social awkwardnesses of it all, and actually Zoom has been a relief in that respect. So first step was space to be honest. Second step is to acknowledge brokenness and hurt. Allow people to be honest about what has gone wrong, what is going wrong. The third step, the final step, is to offer truth. To offer truth. Exactly as Mark was saying at the beginning. We acknowledge feelings, they are real, they may not be. What was this amazing phrase? I wrote it down. Emotions aren't a great barometer of reality, they are a great warning of unreality. When we feel extreme emotions, we need to offer truth to explain. So we've put together this series. I'm just going to show you a bit about what I've just put in the link. This series is about tackling emotions through Psalms, and we have identified 4 monsters. Those emotions that are negative: anxiety, abandonment, apathy, insecurity. We've identified 4 monsters, and we're saying we have a psalm for each one of them. The Lord has a psalm for each one of them. And the series is called With God Together. So the focus is with these monsters, we go to God, and we go to God together as a church. That supremely is the way out of lockdown, whether you use this series or not. We go to God, we know he is with us, and we do that together as a church. So this is an overview that's in that introductory document I just put in, but this is the overview. 4 sessions. There is a monster being fought in each one of them. There is a psalm to address that monster. And this is what we're suggesting faith in kids could look like. If a child got hold of the power of this psalm, the truth about God that is in it, this is the difference it could make to a child. So The first document I put through is an introduction to the whole series. And then the second one is the first of those four. So the one there is that first one, Psalm 136, God loves us forever. As you'd expect with all our resources, there is the first bit which takes the leader through the passage, explaining how it helps with this issue. Then there is a Bible story idea that we're suggesting can be done to the whole church, because these are difficult things. So as a minimum, let's give them a taste of the monster and the psalm. Then there is the lesson overview for the person who's new to this. So maybe this is a training session that Amy was discussing in the garden with a glass of wine, with our team coming together for the first time or the second time, is that we take them through, this is how we put together a Sunday school session. One in our group was saying he's worked out he has 15 people to train. Could this be a resource to do that training? Then, as all our resources, we've got a section for the 3s to 5s. We've got a section for the 5 to 7s. We've got a section for the 8s to 11s. And in the 8s to 11s, there's always that extra stretch where we have in mind, maybe you've got some 11s to 14s. You want to use this resource, not find a different one. And so can we just help you to push it on a bit further? We've got the most amazing illustrations. So the pictures for the youngest to show them what's happening, the case studies for the older children to talk through what this might look like, craft, worksheets, this incredible fold it around and take it home, put it in the hand of the parent, not the hand of the child, so it doesn't get lost in the footwell of the car. You put it into the hand of the parent and it empowers them to discuss it rather than assumes they know what to say next. And at the end, you find this template for putting together a Sunday school session. This could just be a training session. I say, if you write something in each box, you're ready to teach children. So maybe you're the people to help people work through that empty template, work through the first session together as a training exercise, so they each leave with their lesson plan ready to teach. That's a training session. Okay, so I have just put in the chat the 2 files that are available today. We will email you afterwards with these 2, and by the middle of July, we'll have all 4 ready for you. We wanted to give these to you now early so that you can start to plan. I am now going to show you the promo video we have put together. Anita has just sent you the link so that you can send this off to everyone you've ever met. I'm now going to work out how to do that. Here we go. I'm going to go in here. I'm going to share my sound. I'm going to talk you through every button I press. I'm going to make it bigger. And we're...
Life can feel pretty overwhelming. We're handling some pretty big emotions. Loneliness, fear, worry, confusion. Does God even care? But we were never meant to deal with this alone. God shows us in the Psalms exactly how we can thrive in the midst of it all. When we lose interest, wondering if anyone cares, He shows us where to look to know we're loved. When we're afraid of what's happening around us, He says He's right there with us and He'll never leave. When we are worried, He is our safe place to run to. When we can't wait for the happy ending, He offers lasting peace. We can tackle life's biggest challenges as the church, with God, together.
Well, the exciting part is that's the first time I've ever watched. Unmute yourself. Oh, crumbs. Something else is happening now. Sorry, I'm being told about a Japanese Nobel Prize winner. That always happens, doesn't it? Right, we're back. All 4 lessons are available on the 14th of July to download, all for free on our website. That's the way we do it. That video I just showed you is on YouTube. You could send that to some friends. Can I tell you that the vision for this is that this resource could get put in the hands of our church leadership team, and we could consider how these passages could be preached through in church. If it's an all-age service, could these resources be used? For instance, the worksheets given to children during the sermon, the pictures given to children, so that they have the best chance of engaging? Or even could this be preached to adults while the children are doing it? And could this resource be handed to the youth minister? Because I bet they're gifted enough to work out what this session would look like for the youth. In other words, our best chance of coping with this is if we did it together, and if we understood these issues together, and if we shared together how we're feeling and what the Lord offers us. So this resource clearly has been written with under 11s in mind and families, but we would love to imagine that whole churches would want to tackle this together. We are now going to go to our breakout groups for the final time. 14th of July, everything is available. I think Amy's typing it in. Amy's essentially typing into the chat what I should have said. Okay, we're going to go to our breakout groups for the final time. What questions do you have? What encouragements do you take away? What are your plans? That's okay. One thing to do, one question to ponder. Off we go. Okay, we're back. We're back, and we're on the run in home. Everyone loves their breakout group. I love my breakout group. Amy, mine's better than yours. Now, I'd love you just to give me a hand. I'd love your help. We at Faith in Kids, we think of this group, the people who come to our big day outs, if you like, as our super users. You are the ones who understand most what we are about. You understand most, you share our vision, the things we want for your churches, you want for your churches. And we've just got a big project we're thinking about, and it's got a lot of questions by it. So I'm just going to give you a straw poll, and it's just to understand something of your churches so that we can write this next resource for you properly. First question, does your church normally have time for all ages during the service? In other words, if there was a component we gave you that was for all ages, parents sat next to their children, could your church use it? That's the first question. Second question, can your church show a video with sound for 3 minutes? Does your church have the capacity for that all age bit to be a video for less than 3 minutes? Okay. Someone doesn't want to be called a super user. I couldn't catch in the chat why that is, but I'm sorry if I've offended someone. Can you imagine doing a 10-week course with your children in Sunday school? In other words, we've just given you a 4-week course. We're wondering about writing 10 weeks. So the question is would you rather it was 8? Would you rather it was 5? Or are you just totally happy with 10? Okay, that's the next question. Next question, number 4. Would your church leadership consider matching the adult teaching program with this children's course? So exactly as I've just said, that vision, you preach your way through the kids program, but it's for everyone. Yes, we can imagine doing that in sermons. Yes, we can imagine doing that in home groups. Perhaps, or in honesty, Ed, it's unlikely. Okay, so you submit. Thank you very much for helping us. Those results, we're turning a handle. It's a project called Who Am I? Everyone is now giving me their better ideas. I'm so sorry. Okay, you are our total heroes. You are our greatest fans. You are our core friends. You are the people who counsel us. There's all of those better. You can decide later what we call you. All I'm saying is you are the friends we turn to first when we're stuck. I've just turned to you first. We're coming to an end. I've got some results. I think you can all see them. Is that right? Can you all see them? Yeah, are they on your screen? There you go. Anita, you're going to take some screenshots of those because we're going to put, look, 98% of you could show a video with sound for an all age slot. Isn't that good? Okay. And 81% could imagine doing a 10-week course. Look, I'm not going to read it out. That's so helpful. We will study that in our team and understand that. We're now coming to an end. There is a slide. I show at the end of every one, and I think now you've got the message because fewer and fewer of you email us each time. But if you are the leader of your children's ministry in your church and you haven't before told us who you are, we would love to know who you are. What is your name? What is your church? What is your postal address? Because we would love to post you some resources as they come out for free. And we'd love to know your email address. Okay, I ask you that every time. I think the final question for you is, how could you help us to grow? You are our best friends. One way is that we have just launched this resource for the first time here amongst you. Which networks could you share this on? Which WhatsApp groups could you send this to? Who will you send this? Who will you let know? Could you help us to grow by talking to your church leader about us? By having a discussion about how you could help us to grow? We have a church partner program where we want to be one of those people you pray for, people you give to. We let you know what we're thinking. We trial our materials with you. We ask you the questions first. Or maybe you yourselves want to give to us. We give out resources because what we've understood is it is easier to give churches resources because individuals give money to us to pay for those resources. That has been the story of Faith in Kids. We have always given out the resources because generous people give us money to pay for them. We're growing. Our next team day is going to have about 8 people there. Amazingly, we want to keep growing. Please do consider how you can help us grow in whatever way our best friends can think of. Our time has come to an end, sadly. We will be back in September. We deliberately have put this here in June so that you have time to think about this. We are not proposing that you start doing this series on the 15th of July. We have told you in June what we're thinking. Maybe you work with your ministry team. You just start those garden meetings this side of the summer holiday so that they have time to turn the Psalms over in their minds over the holiday. And maybe you start gently working this through with families in September. But we have put this here in June, so you have plenty of time to work this out. Amy, are you watching the chat? Is there anything we need to answer that I've been not looking at before we leave?
I am watching the chat. There are people asking how to join the church partner program that you've mentioned. You're being invited to church prayer meetings. I think the answer is you'd love to come as long as they're virtual. And lots of people are saying brilliant, and you're being very, very waffly about how to be generous.
Sorry, Amy. Sorry.
We'd love you to be generous so we can carry on being generous.
Okay, there you go. I heard it from Amy. £20 a month goes a very long way to helping Faith in Kids grow. I should be blunter. We want to grow. We want to do more. We want to keep on writing brilliant resources. I can honestly say, when I saw these resources for the first time yesterday, I was actually astonished. And if you see the list of people who wrote them, I did honestly think, how on earth did Paula coordinate that many people to hit the deadline that was today to produce them?
And meanwhile, the answer to the partnering churches question is?
Drop us an email at info@faithinkids.org and we will send you our best effort at what this can be. And then you talk to us and tell us what would it look like for your church, because every church does church partnerships differently.
Drop us an email.
Oh, you're so annoying. Amy.
I'm going to pray.
I'm going to stop. You pray to finish. I won't say another word.
Heavenly Father, we do thank you that you are a good God that we can run to. And Lord, we thank you for the encouragement of Psalm 46. We thank you for the encouragement of one another. We thank you for the encouragement of being involved in ministry together. We thank you for great chats in breakout rooms, for moments of feeling moved by your word and your goodness. Lord, just help us to reach families, support families, love one another, and ooze grace as we run to you together. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you.